and welcome to the Mime Radio Show podcast. I'm Karen Hoyer.
And I'm James Donlin. We'd like to welcome you to another exciting episode of the Mime Radio Show. We have a wonderful guest today. Before I go further, I'd like to at least give a shout out to the man in the darkness behind our two images here, Michael Diaz, our producer. And we have to be really nice to him because he's already a wonderfully nice guy. But if we're even especially nice to him, we know that the quality of work will rise to even a higher level. He's back there, and if we don't do the right thing, he can turn us off at any time. Okay.
You're really late.
Thank you, Michael Diaz, for the man with the wise fingers with all the gadgets that you have to manipulate.
So who's our guest this time?
Our guest is Jim R. Moore. And let me read you something about him before we start. Jim R. Moore has been making special photographs for over 50 years. He began with rock magazine Crawdaddy, shooting the Grateful Dead, Jethro Tull, the Allman Brothers, to ultimately photographing a most wonderful group of performers, eccentrics. Jim documented the World Trade Center for Philippe Petit, used in the Oscar-winning film Man on Wire. He has photographed many performers from different genres of the last decade that are now part of his new book, Don't Miss This, A Decade of Eccentric Performers. His blog, VOD Visuals, is a go-to site for interviews and photos of eccentric performers. VOD Visuals Press is a recent publishing venture. What inspired all this? He was a New York City street mime decades ago. And with that, let's welcome in Jim R. Moore.
Bravo.
Hello.
There he is. Hello, Jim.
Welcome.
Well, you know, because you've been watching some of these podcasts, that our first question is always like, how do you prepare? How do you get ready to face the audience? And we have this wonderful picture that you posted of you as a young mime. You posted that on Facebook of you as in your street mime days. So we do know that you were a performer, and I think being a performer makes you a better photographer. But tell us, what is your preparation as a performer? And then to go on, how do you prepare for a photo shoot when you're shooting photographs with a performer?
Yeah, so performing, I did some street performing, I don't know, a few years ago.
That's when was it during the golden age when street busking was a welcome sight in the USA. I mean, now it's quite different, right? But when you were doing it, I'm thinking it was probably a really interesting experience with lots of different like forerunners to the eccentrics out there. You know,
there was a lot of street performers at the time. I mean, there was Jeff Sheridan doing street magic. There was Richard Wexler playing the violin with his dog sitting next to him, telling stories about Vivaldi. It was me doing mime on the corner. A couple other mimes. Keith Berger was out in the street, and a couple other people were out there performing. It was a very ripe time for street performers at the time, and kind of a renaissance of street performing, you might call it. And also somehow the authorities at hand were a lot more loose about. I mean, we did get arrested a couple of times, Jeff and I, but it was minor compared to the number of times we performed. It was only a handful of times we got arrested. So I mean, I used to get ready at home, and then I would like get dressed up in my wardrobe that I wore in the street, and then I would go to. Well, for example, I worked in front of the 42nd Street Library. I would go behind the bushes and I would actually put my makeup on there. Even though I was already in costume, I just went and did my makeup behind the bush. And then I would come out and I would start the routine performing on the steps of the library on 42nd Street. That was one of my favorite spots,
Great. And what inspired you to be a street mime, or even to study mime or practice it?
I studied mime with a couple of different people. Paul Curtis at the American Mime Theater, and Sterling Jensen, who was a protege of Etienne Decroux. And when Etienne Decroux had his school in New York for 5 years, Sterling was his kind of like favorite student. And when Decroux moved back to Paris, he told Sterling that he could continue teaching Decroux mime in New York. So Sterling continued the École de Mime de Etienne Decroux de New York in New York for several years. I connected with him, and he came to my studio every Saturday morning for 2 hours, and we did like a class with two other students. There were three of us all together. And
Wow.
for 2 years, we did classes every day. I'm sorry, every Saturday we would do classes together. And he was brilliant. He was absolutely phenomenal. If you look at the early Decroux films, you'll see Sterling Jensen mentioned quite a few times because he was part of the ensemble that was recorded. That's now historical footage of Decroux's work in those days.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
So how did you take what you learned via the Decroux school and apply it to the street? And how did
I don't know. I mean, I don't remember how I got into going into the street. I don't remember exactly the train of thought that I had that actually motivated me to go to the street. But one of the things that I discovered a few years ago was that I was looking through all my archives of photographs, and I realized that every time I would go out into the street, I would actually set up a camera in my studio and take a picture of myself before I went out, of
Oh, wow.
how I would look to the audience before I went out into the street. And then I would be content with looking at how I could see what it looked like, and then I would then go out in the street and perform. So after looking at that a few years ago, I realized that I was actually more interested in kind of the outside part of the performer, the visual aspect of the performer, more than the interior part of the performer. And that's why then I eventually ended up going into the photography of performers as opposed to becoming a lifetime performer. I mean, it was really that kind of discovery that I had of enjoying the visual aspect of documenting the movement and capturing those moments in time that are so, kind of ethereal and lifetime memorable.
It's there's such a connection there, I mean, the mime art is an ethereal art form, and it's fleeting, and you have to be present to really enjoy it. And it's about space and time. And it's so interesting that you become a master photographer of these kinds of genres. And there's such a connection there, like I like the way you were talking about the you were thinking about the outside rather than what I was doing. I tend to think like that myself. I think that's part of the mime art, is how you almost take photographs of yourself. I mean, there's images of shapes and forms that as a performer, you have in your head, almost as if you're working on you're sculpting yourself, or painting yourself in a space,
Yeah, we've been talking
it's more relative now than ever before, because people can now videotape themselves rehearsing and look at themselves. I mean, that wasn't the case back when I was in the street, but now it's even more applicable, I think,
But we've been talking a lot about the connection between visual art and mime specifically, not as opposed to like theater and dance, that it is sculptural and visual. And that is so important. And so many mime artists are also visual artists, which is it's pretty cool. So on again about preparing. How do you prepare when you're going to, you've connected with a performer and they're coming to your studio to do a posed photo shoot? How do you get ready for that?
Well, I haven't really shot. I mean, I would say like maybe 25% of my work has been in the studio, but most of the stuff I've been doing is mostly shooting performances. I really like live performance. I like watching it. I like documenting it. And, I like the idea of smiling and laughing at the same time of taking a picture is a delightful thought for me. I just really enjoy the idea of being able to laugh and feel really good inside at someone's brilliant talent making me do that and capturing those moments on film.
So do you equate that with almost being an audience member yourself?
Absolutely.
At those moments, it's like it's all one with the viewer, and trying to. That seems like it would be a very informative aspect of taking pictures, is you're enjoying what you're seeing, and so that's very. And also you could tell if the performer was lacking, because maybe you could you're feeling all those things that one does when they observe something, right?
Yeah, it's very true, and there have been comments made by some performers that I know who are actually very excellent performers, but they said, Jim, you make sometimes people's acts look better than they actually are. which is, I mean, when you're a gun for hire, you have no choice about who you're photographing. But I try and photograph these days, especially now that I'm retired as being a gun for hire. I like just shoot things that I enjoy shooting now.
Right.
Well, that means you're finding the aesthetic core of what they're doing. I mean, you're going beyond the obvious to find that metaphysical insight, which I think is very important. Yeah. Wow.
Metaphysics is very important to me.
Yeah.
Do you see the show beforehand, or are you seeing it for the first time when you shoot it?
Most of the time, I prefer to see a dress rehearsal or a rehearsal or tech rehearsal before I photograph the show. That's my favorite way of doing something, and then going back and shooting the show or shooting the dress rehearsal. I mean, if I get to see 2 dress rehearsals or 1 tech and then 1 dress, I'll do that. I mean, whatever. I prefer shooting dress rehearsals, but sometimes I can watch the dress tech and then shoot the performance. But I always like to see at least once before I photograph it. That's very important for me, just to see what the gist of the show is, where they move to, what the lighting is like, how it basks the performer on the stage. All those kinds of things are very important to me in terms of capturing what it is that I'm after getting, that moment in time that kind of like represents them when someone's looking at a photograph. It's an old story about when the American Indian used to be photographed, they always didn't want you to photograph them because they said you were stealing their soul. And in a way, when you're photographing a performer, you're stealing their soul, because if someone takes a bad picture of you and you don't know any better, and you put it out as a glossy in the old days, or you put it online now, and people look at that picture and it's horrible, then you're being misrepresented in a way by the bad photographer and what he did to your work. So that's a very important aspect for me, is to actually make sure that what it is that they're doing is represented in a way that's favorable and it features them in a way that's positive, in what they do.
Yeah, that's very interesting. This is something I've tried to be aware of my whole career. I've been doing this as long as you've been working, 50 years plus. And I always felt the good photograph was crucial, because the good photograph does not lie. I mean, the photographer given their skill, can find that core, that metaphysical thing, or they can distort it. That I think it's much more powerful than video. Today's world is performers need to know about video, but I'm feeling there's nothing a video can do that can quite come to the level of a good photo.
I agree.
Because it's there. You can look at it for a while. You can go away from it, come back, find a new element of it. And I think that's a good photographer is crucial to an artist, I think, especially a few decades ago, just crucial. And I think that the images were deeper than the video that you see today,
Yeah.
Also, you can edit videos, to make yourself look much better.
Yeah.
than what your act actually represents on stage, So I think
it's also the difference between, like what I was talking about earlier, a posed photo, like a promo posed photo, doesn't speak to me as much as a really good performance photo. I mean, and I think it's very difficult for some people to take performance photos. I mean, you have to have a good eye and you have to be able to capture the right moments, plus all the technical side of it, the lighting and the rapidity of movement that you have to be able to capture. Talk a little bit about the challenges.
Yeah, I think it's the same brain. Talk about. I'm just gonna say, I think the brain you use is the same you might have used when you were actually performing. Just from a different source, it's coming. But anyway, yeah, challenges. Now, I have a question. I have some. You've unlocked a whole flurry of questions that I'm trying to ask. But let's start with Karen here. So
there's a lot of photographers. Who, I mean, these days you can buy some really amazing cameras for a decent amount of money, and take some kick-ass technical photographs that are quite brilliant. But unless you really understand what that moment is. You can be a technical whiz kid. If you don't understand the moment on stage that's vital to capture, it's not going to help you to have a fucking $3,000 camera. Excuse my French, but it's not going to help you to have that good camera. It's not going to help you to be on top of it with technical issues and understanding. If you can't capture that moment in time that represents the person that's on stage doing their thing, you know?
Yeah. What, speaking about the good photo, like I kind of learned that if I stood on one toe, or if I was going to be shot by a photographer, I stood on one toe, or I lost my balance a little bit, or I was hovering in a suspension moment, that the photos tended to be really good. Is that somehow providing that spatial potential of this could happen played really well through the lens of a camera. That's a trick that I learned, when as a performer, when I was preparing to go to be photographed, do you ever use those kinds of a few like Jim R. Moore tricks or techniques?
That's like a studio. That's like studio work. When you're doing a studio job, you have to make sure that that there's some kinetic aspect to the movement, not just somebody standing there posing like Karen was talking about. You don't want a pose shot. You want something a little bit more animated. And when someone's animated in the studio, when they're moving around, when they're dancing, when they're doing mime, and that's much more interesting to capture than just someone standing there with a pose. It doesn't really say anything. Yeah.
What so you were the street mime in front of an audience. You've we talked about how when you take photos of a performance, you are almost like part of that audience yourself.
Absolutely.
How do you view the audience in that performer? I mean, you've been in front of an audience, you've been part of an audience, and you've been documenting both those elements together. So what is it? Do you have a particular take on who an audience is in terms of these performers you might have shot, like what they represent or what they represented for you when you were actually on the street? Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, when I was performing in the street, I had, there's so many different kinds of people walking down the block. It's not really indicative of a theater audience where people pay to go into a theater to see a particular kind of show. You're actually performing for lay people just walking back and forth, during their lunch hour or whatever. So it's a big cross section of secretaries and executives and painters and whatever. There's a whole New York City crowd there that's completely different than a crowd that will come to a theater and pay $25 to see a show, and you have a captive audience there because they're there because they like what it is that you do, or they like you, they know your name, or they like the show name, or whatever it is that you got to bring them into that theater. That's a different kind of take on what kind of an audience it is,
So it's a friendly humanity. I mean, I don't mean like that person's a baker, that person's a cop, that person's a professor. It's like it's a kind of the face of humanity. Yeah, like this is a force coming at you that you're part of, and yet you're hopefully taking them to another place, in some ways.
Yeah, and then the street performing was always a thrill for me because I was so close to people that I didn't know. There was a couple of incidences, a couple of curious incidences that I'll share with you. One, I was working in front of the 42nd Street Library, and there was a little alcove there. There's one on one side of the lion, and there's another alcove on the other side of the lion. And I worked inside that alcove. There's a little bench here, and then there's an open, kind of almost like an amphitheater, and then there's the sidewalk over here. So people would walk by, and I'd be standing here. Sometimes I would just hold a pose for any length of time until I got an audience, not knowing whether I was real or a statue or whatever. So then one time I went into my act, and there was this guy walking by who had painting clothes on, like in overalls, and he was looking at me perform, and I was doing my thing, and then he just emptied a gallon of white paint on me. He just threw a whole gallon of white paint on me. And then he said, "Now that's funny. Now that's funny."
What did you do? How did you react to that?
I just said, "Yeah, that's very funny," and we kept on walking, and I kept on performing. But then the other incident was I was on the steps of the church on 53rd Street, St. Thomas's Church. Jeff and I used to perform there all the time on Saturdays, but I worked there during the week.
Who's Jeff? Who is Jeff?
Jeff Sheridan. He's a magician. Oh. A good friend of mine who's a magician, really brilliant magician.
Okay.
Einstein of magicians, as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, so I was performing a weekday, and I was again, like in the middle of my act, I drew a chalk square, and people were standing around it, and this guy came up to me and actually punched me in the nose. He knocked me down. He freaking knocked me down, and then he goes, "That's for being my ex-wife's lover."
What?
That's what, he thought I was his ex-wife's lover. It was like a bizarre thing that happened. I got up, my nose was bleeding. I'm like, I had to stop what I was doing and fix myself up, and I continued my act for another hour afterwards. But it was the most strange freaking occurrence. I mean, New York is full of people that have misguided interpretations of where they are and what they're doing and who they're seeing. It's just one of those things I chalk up to New York City,
So this is early 70s or late 60s, like that.
Late 70s, early 80s.
Late 70s, early 80s. Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
You've always lived in New York, right? In the New York area. That's your
well, I would say 80% of my life. I mean, I was actually born in Glendale, California.
No way.
Yeah. But I was only here for 3 years, and then I moved to St. Louis for 6, and then I moved to New York, and I've been here ever since. So
wow.
I grew up in St. Louis.
Oh, yeah. I moved from St. Louis when they started building the Arch. That's when I moved out. Yeah.
Right.
Downtown below the Arch was all this seedy, burlesque used magazine area. It was kind of
so what inspirations or influences did you have to enter a career as an artist? Like what sparked you? How, what happened? Like what happened in Glendale or St. Louis or when you were a teenager, I'm assuming in the New York City area?
I think it came later than that. I mean, I was a film student at NYU.
Okay.
And in my last year of my school there, I was directing a short feature film, and I was very young. I didn't know, what directing meant or how to direct, but I had to direct. So this two young actor and actress were in the scene that I was directing for my film, and they weren't responding to what it is that I was doing. The commands that I was giving them or the directions that I was giving them weren't working with them. So I thought it was my fault. They thought, oh, okay, so Jimmy, you're not doing it right. You're not telling them the right words, or you're not explaining to them properly what it is. So you should really learn more about directing or learn more about movement. So then that led me to go study mime, to study the vocabulary of movement, so I can have a more precise description of what it is that I wanted them to do when I was directing the film. So I got into the mime thing, and that was the end of the film thing. I just fell into the mime thing and started miming for like umpteen years.
Well, the mime art is a cinematic art. I mean, totally. It's with editing and space and time, and you know that it makes sense. Yeah,
absolutely.
You've also said that when you were doing these street mime gigs, that you took your camera along with you and started taking photographs of the people watching you. Is that mostly what you?
I'd like to photograph people taking pictures of me. So when they were photographing me, I would pull out my camera and take a picture of them. Unfortunately, that camera, which was dedicated to that job, got stolen out of my bag. So I never had that archive of those years.
Wow.
Photographs of people that were photographing me, which would have been a great exhibit. But such is life. That's New York.
Can you pinpoint a moment or a period where you made the shift from a performer to the photographer, when you made that journey from the one who's being looked at to the one looking at others? Yeah.
It was a slow dissolve, I'd say, because I was like I said, taking pictures of myself before I went out. So I kept on taking pictures of myself. And one of the pictures that I took is in my new book. In the introduction, I actually put a description of what I'm telling you in that to explain how I got into shooting eccentric performing arts from having been a performer. So I put a picture that I had done to myself back in the day. And I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting phenomena. I mean, I was working a night job at the time. I had a night job. So I'd go out during the day and perform at lunch times and then weekends. And then in the evening, I worked in a photo lab, processing color slide film. So I had an evening job because I had a family. I had a family to support. I have a kid. I had a wife, ex-wife, and I had a kid. So I had to pay child support. So I had a regular job to pay the child support, and then I would do the day thing, performing to appease my soul.
Yeah. What is it that attracts you to the eccentric performer?
You know, I think eccentric performing arts is interesting because I see it as a kind of a solo a solo thing. Like when an individual decides to put together an act, most of the time by themselves, sometimes duets or trios, but I mostly photograph solo performers, and I think it's really kind of unique to watch someone develop and work on an act, whatever it is, whatever, singing or comedy or mime or clown, whatever. I mean, it's just so insane to think about how much work goes into that. I used to always say, well, how many hours do you spend rehearsing? You spend like 6 hours a day, every day, for how many years did you do? And you don't want to spend $100 on a photographer to capture those moments. Like,
Wow.
come on, like you're like shorting yourself out by not having a good picture of what it is you've been performing and rehearsing for the last umpteen years.
Have you
So
have you ever like done that with an artist where like they've started on a piece and then maybe a couple of years you come back and you see the next iteration of the piece?
well, not intentionally, but I have photographed people over the years. I see people performing, I photograph them performing, and then I see them 3 years later, and then I see them 5 years later, and I see them 3 years later. So that I've seen people evolve and change and grow like numerous times. I mean, now I'm going to be, an elder statesman soon. So, I've been around. I've seen a lot. You know what I mean? I'm not going to talk about my age.
Have
but
you? I know you started with rock bands and rock stars
Yeah.
in the beginning, and then you've shifted to, I mean, all manner of subjects. Is there a particular kind of performer that is your favorite, or is more productive, more colorful, or more, in that spectrum? Is there, or are they all the same, in terms of
No,
their
they're not
interest?
all the same at all. I mean, people have unique characteristics. Their personalities shine through their acts if they're good. Um, you know, I mean, I saw this performer at La Mama years and years ago. He was already in his 70s when I saw him perform. He was doing his own solo show. He had been in Alfred Hitchcock films, and he had been in the English Music Hall for years. And he was a very talented and skilled ukulele player and dancer and singer. He was a really wonderful performer. And he was. I mean, that was 1978. I saw him perform at La Mama, and he was one of the original people that inspired me to want to photograph eccentric performing arts, because he was so unique and so much fun and so wonderful to watch. And he just tickled my fancy to no extent. And the fact that he was having such a ball on stage doing what he enjoyed doing, it just made me feel so good about documenting what he's doing, that he was, and sharing those pictures with other people so they could, take joy in seeing this guy or getting to know him. And I mean, I think, like, when I first started my blog, it's like 12 or 13 years ago, the subtitle was Perpetuating the Mythology of Eccentric Performing Arts. But I realized that was too long to put in to put in my advertising, but I still like it. I still think it says something.
Well, it's kind of circus-like and sideshow-like.
Yeah. I love the circus and sideshow.
The midway, yeah.
Absolutely. It's all those punsters and playing with words and kind of
Yeah.
exploiting the language in a really fun way.
Yeah.
I've only had the experience of while I was working with Big Apple Circus Clown Care and with Healthy Humor, you came and you did photographs of us as a team and individual photos, and it was so much fun because you seemed to be having such a great time. Like you would be laughing and saying, "Oh, no, do this," and it wasn't hard to pose for you because you were having such a good time.
I just did a recent Healthy Humor job. Karen, who I've known for years, invited me up to the Hole in the Wall camp, which is Paul Newman's wonderful place up in Connecticut that he has for the kids, severely ill kids, severely handicapped mentally kids. It's a big, huge, gigantic campground that he invites kids up to for a week during the summer so they can be regular kids and just play and canoe and do all these great. So we had it for a week for the Healthy Humor Convention, or you might call it, right? And I did a big group shot, and then I photographed the performers, and it was just so much fun. I mean, I have such admiration for the clown care unit and Healthy Humor people. They're just amazing. What they're doing and how heartfelt what it is that they do is it brings tears to my eyes. I just think it's so wonderful that people they pay attention to these things in the world. You know, it's really important. Really important.
Do you have some photos on hand that you could just share with our audience just for a moment?
Sure. So this is
maybe talk about it at the same time, because this will be audio and visual. This
is
podcast. So
my first book, which is called Insights, which came out in 1989. Paul Zaloom, Jim Calder, and I don't remember. He was a dancer. I forgot his name, but anyway.
Maybe I know. Paul, hold it up again. Let me get my glasses on.
Yeah.
It rings a bell, but I don't know.
Rose? Is it David Rose?
No, it wasn't David Rose, but somebody like David. So here's a wonderful group that I love. These two guys, I mean, Noel Parenti and Karen McCormick.
Oh, Noel Parenti. He
was phenomenal. He was
very innovative. He was misunderstood too. I performed in the '74 festival with him in Milwaukee. We're in Wisconsin. What? Let's show that put it a little closer so people can see. Which one's Noel?
Noel's the one. That's the duet shot. Noel and Karen.
Okay. What was Karen's last name?
McCormick.
That sounds familiar.
Karen McCormick. That's Karen McCormick there, and then Noel Parenti and Karen McCormick. I did a duet called El Floppo, which was absolutely hysterical.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jim, is that does in that book? Do you have that picture of Paul Zaloom with all the shoes on him?
Yeah, that is.
Every time I think of you, that's the photo I think of.
There it is. Paul, another brilliant performer. Paul, brilliant. Yeah.
Were you able to travel? Keep the book up there. See if there's anything that you like. But were you ever to travel to the West Coast much? Because
Slava and the Snow. This is before Snow Show. He did Litsidai, which was the company he brought over from Russia. And they
were wonderful.
They performed at the Philadelphia Festival in '87, I think it was. And
maybe if people are listening to this, they'll want to watch the visual because they hear you talking about these great artists. But did you ever travel to the West Coast much? Because I know
is Mike Motion.
Oh yeah, wow, the genius that's disappeared, sort of. You know? Yeah, wow, he was so innovative. Did you ever travel to the West Coast? Because I found there's, our country, there's kind of the East Coast crowd and the West Coast crowd over the last 50 years. And, the interchange was rare, even, it did happen, of course, but there's a whole community of West Coast mimes that start, and then there's a community of East Coast.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on that, or did you stay mostly East?
Yeah, I'm an East Coast guy. I had this theory about, New York is such a hot spot. People always pass through New York, even if they're from different parts of the world. I mean, I photographed Gordy Hooter in New York. She's from Switzerland.
Wonderful.
All these different people that have performed. Slava from Russia. He came to New York. I mean, in Philadelphia. Actually, I photographed him in Philadelphia. So, but there are a couple of photographers out there that are quite brilliant. Michelle Bates. She shoots the Moisture Festival all the time. She's wonderful. She's a really talented photographer. There's a couple other people that are photographing the Moisture Festival along with her that are really fun. And they photograph other things besides the Moisture Festival, but that's one of the things they do every year for sure.
Why do you think that happened? There was that kind of two lost communities from each other. Do you have any thoughts on why that? Is it just our very diverse American culture kind of?
I think traveling, people travel, they don't travel. I don't know. I mean, good question. I mean,
it's a good question.
I don't know. I would love to have gone to the West Coast more often and photographed more things over there, but I was too busy in the East Coast. So
no, I hear you. It seems like photography, like any visual art would be a great translator, a great documentation of the whole world.
Yeah, I agree.
Karen, do I hear something?
What did you hear something?
Do I hear something?
I hear something. Do you hear?
Oh, it's that time.
This is Francis Bruin, by the way.
Who? Francis? Oh, were you over the front? Oh, wow. I hear that it's time to open the gift.
Oh, no kidding.
You have a gift, because I think this is going to lead us into another conversation.
Yes, the gift music.
I just saw this note on the back. Please wait to open this package. I didn't see that note before, but I'm glad
Yeah. Where's it from? Tell us where it's from.
It's from the Mime Museum in Chicago, Illinois. Who's in Chicago?
It's an institution, the Mime Museum.
Is it really?
Yeah, hopefully
Here in the
you'll have
Midwest.
some of your photographs in there at some point.
Yeah.
It's not a fictitious place that like.
Well, as fictitious as anything. But what in these days, what's true? It's a real difficulty with truth. We don't know what's true and what's not in this
My
day.
museum, Michael Diaz, curator. Okay, souvenir number OX R292. Description: Carabiner left on the floor at the World Trade Center tower by Philippe Petit, August 1974. Found by first responders in 2001. Turned to Jim Moore, documentary photographer of the coup. Wow, no kidding.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Wow, it's awful shiny for being that old.
Yeah.
They must have polished it.
I think this is a Carney thing here. Well, thank you very much. I love carabiner. I have a carabiner on my. I use it for my keys. So this is,
Yeah. So tell us
Jim,
about that event that this is supposedly come from. This.
Yes,
Tell us the story briefly about your connection with Philippe.
Philippe.
Pettit. My relatives are Pettits, which is really Petit, right? So anyway, yeah.
So Philippe was in Paris. I had a friend in Paris who was studying at the Crew School of Mime, and they knew each other from Philippe's street performing activities. She was a fan of his. He mentioned to her that he was interested in coming to New York and doing something in New York.
First of all, tell the audience. I mean, I'm sure most people know who he is, but what's he known for?
Yeah, Philippe Petit is the French aerialist, high wire walker that walked between the World Trade Center 7 times back and forth in 1974 August.
Yeah.
And was recorded on still photography, analog film, not video and not 16 millimeter film, but on stills. And it was made into a film called Man on Wire, which won the Oscar.
Right.
In 92.
So now continue with your story. So
so Philippe was in Paris, and he mentioned to his friend, who was a friend of mine, that he wanted to come to New York and do something. He didn't mention what it was, but she said, "Oh, I have a friend in New York who's a street performer. I was in the street at the time performing mime." So he called me on the phone and said, "Hello, my name is Philippe Petit. I'm a street juggler. I want to come to New York." So I recommended that he come and perform at the plaza of the 42nd Street Library, and it was like December. So
maybe he'd get white paint thrown on him too, right? So
no. No. That was a singular experience, unfortunately.
Okay. That guy wasn't doing it to everybody.
No, I don't think he did it once, probably, and that was it.
Keith Berger escaped, probably, right?
Keith was downtown. He didn't get it uptown. So Philippe came to New York and juggled in the streets in the front of the 42nd Street Library. Afterwards, we all went out for lunch, and then he told me that he had this idea about putting a high wire between 2 buildings in New York City. So I said, "Well, count me in. I'll help you. I'll photograph whatever you want to do. I'm there. I'll help you out." So that was the beginning of our relationship, and then he would go back to France and come back to New York, and then we would go down to the World Trade Center, which was still under construction. The top 15 floors were still unfinished. So wow. we would sneak up the back stairwell with hard hats, construction type hard hats, with a fiber built type tube that looked like architectural plans or whatever, and we would sneak up the stairwell, wow. 110 flights to the top, and then we'd arrive.
You went up the stairways.
Yeah, it was stairwell. Yeah, exactly. 110 flights. Yeah, and then we get to the top, and then there were all these guys working on the roof up there. A lot of them are American Indians because they're not afraid of heights.
Really?
Yeah, they're iron workers. A lot of them are American Indians. Yeah. So we got to talking to them, and I would take pictures of them, working and this and that. I have some great shots of them.
Oh, I'd love to see
those. And then the next, we said, "Oh, we'll be back tomorrow. We'll be back next week. We'll bring the pictures." And they said, "Oh, great, that'd be wonderful." So then we go back and we give them prints and talk to them a little bit more about what was going on and how they're bringing. Anyway, so
These were the days that you could, like, I remember in those days being able to walk right on an airplane at Kennedy Airport with no security.
Yes,
You just walk
yes,
right on. So
yes.
I'm assuming it was kind of like that at the World Trade Center building.
There was one security guard that walked around with this little keychain thing that punch, kind of punch. And we just hid from him, and he did his rounds and went back to his corner and fell asleep. But yeah. So anyway, we did up and down. We did climbing up and down the stairs numerous times. Visited the tower numerous times. I took numerous pictures in the hallways and then the fun thing was when we decided to rent a helicopter, and we rented a helicopter and we hovered over the top of the building, and I did aerial shots out the window of the top of the towers, which were very instrumental in him figuring out how to do the rigging on the World Trade Center walk eventually.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was quite extraordinary. And the other thing he said, which I
Who
thought,
paid for the helicopter?
oh, he did. Felipe. Yeah. He paid for everything. I was just along for the ride, you might say, taking pictures. Yeah, so then, I told him that I wasn't able to be part of the team that actually went up that day to do the rigging because of all the people in the team, I was the only American in the team. Jean-Louis, his friend, he was French. Philippe was French, Australian guy. Anyway, so long story short, had anything happened to him, I would have been the one that got arrested. I would have been the one that got incarcerated. I would have been the one going to jail and who knows what else. I had a kid growing up. I had a job. I couldn't afford to do any of that. So I didn't become part of the team that actually went up to the top and did the final rigging. But I was on the ground looking up, making phone calls to all the Associated Press.
Really?
Saying, hey, I'm on my way to work. There's a guy in the World Trade Center walking on a wire. You might want to know about it.
Wow.
And this was 1974, right?
Oh, yeah, August 74. Yep.
Yeah.
Right. And I remember seeing, I think you had this on your website of a picture of you doing a handstand. Is that right?
Correct.
On the edge of the building.
We went back months and months later and to do some, kind of memory shots, you might say. And I did some.
Wait, they let you back up months later to the top?
Yeah, we snuck up. I did a handstand on the edge of the towers. He did a handstand on the edge of the towers. I did a picture with the skyscraper in the background. It was quite extraordinary. Yeah, it was a fun time.
And I'm sure over the years you've got lots of questions like we just asked you. And how does this event sit with you now, like years later?
Well,
like
the
what it was
buildings
like
are
50
gone,
years, like 45 years later. What's that?
I mean, the buildings are gone.
The buildings are gone. Like what? How do you reflect on this experience?
Yeah,
now?
It's kind of like, think about it like it's a memory that's significant to me, but wouldn't be significant to someone who's born today. I'd have to explain to them. Well, you see, there used to be these two towers, and there was this guy, and it was illegal, and I forget about it. It's not important to tell anybody else about the story. But I mean, for me, it was a vital experience in my life, and we had a great time, and it was a real joy to be part of the whole scene. And then photographing him after that in the street juggling and all these other performers that I've been photographing over the years.
Were you able to photograph him in the Ringling Brothers for that brief time he was?
I did. Yeah, I photographed him when he was practicing in New York.
Yeah,
and he was in New Orleans. He did a walk in New Orleans. I have a great shot of him and Michoud. Remember Michoud?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a shot of him up here and Michoud down here, and they're like in New Orleans at the Superdome. They were part of the same circus, the Red Circus unit of Ringling Brothers. He did a big walk in the Superdome for Ringling Brothers that year.
So I'm detecting a little bit of sadness or melancholy about this event. Is that true or not? I mean, how do you look? Like you were just mentioning how it's not worth telling somebody now. Maybe like what's going on there? I'm detecting some complex thoughts coming out of you here.
If the buildings were still there, if I could explain to someone, you see those two buildings,
yeah.
But to go through the whole story and to create a scenario of someone, there was this world called Atlantis, and there used to be these amazing people that, I mean, like, why would you bother doing that? I mean,
Right.
you know, it's just too complicated. I don't have time to tell people stories like that. I'm just not. I mean, I feel like my time clock is moving faster and faster every day, and I
Yeah.
just, you know, I want to enjoy myself and have fun, and I don't really think that it's necessary. If they, hey, go read this book. Philippe wrote a really good book about it. Here, read this. You know, that's much more informative than me telling
Yeah.
a story. You know.
You just mentioned in passing taking a picture while they were rehearsing. Do you find photographing a rehearsal a different thing than an actual performance? Is there a different feel to it?
Yeah, well, when you're photographing a rehearsal, the photographer has more freedom to move around
No.
on the stage to get different angles because you're not impinging on the magic of the performance. Actually, you know, you're just there documenting whatever it is that they're doing. And I've had many opportunities when I'm shooting rehearsals that I've gotten some amazing shots that I would never have been able to get during the performance because I'm in a different location that I wouldn't be allowed to be at if I was photographing during performance. But I would shoot a rehearsal and then shoot a performance because then I would have both sides of the coin, you
Right.
might say, you know.
Right.
You know,
We talked a little bit earlier when we were talking about the American Mime Theater and the documentary photos that you took of them. I'm really curious how you manage with different artists. I'm sure there's different ways of doing this, but who owns the photographs and who has permission to use them? And if you have a performer that has bought the rights to the photos, can you use them in your books? Or how do you manage all of that kind of it?
That's basically, well, the photographer owns the rights to the photographs, and you license them to someone to use, say, for a book or a magazine article if they're writing. If it comes to like something that's a commerce vehicle, like a book or a magazine where someone's getting paid or there's ads in a magazine and someone's getting paid to write an article for a magazine, they want a picture in it, then the photographer should be compensated for the work that he's contributing to that magazine because it's making it more saleable, you might say, you know, or for a book, you need a picture for a book, you know, you get paid for the use of the pictures for that book, you know, you still retain the rights, but you give them what they call one-time rights for the use in that book or the use in that magazine. Yeah.
I see. Mhm.
what now years are passing, right?
Oh yeah, they
So, you
are.
know, some of the questions we ask the performers is how do you adjust to advancing age,
Oh dear.
physically and mentally? So, in terms of your work, you know, do you feel that you've been able to keep up with all the new advancements in technology, or do you feel that it's a waste, that some of it's wasteful, or how do you approach? Are you smarter than ever? You know, how do you approach the passing years in terms of photography? The
Oh.
performers have changed a little bit, or have they not? I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I try and keep Dr. Alzheimer's from knocking on my front door by keeping my mind alert and learning new technology, and that's why I started this new company, More Visuals Press, because it's a kind of a breath of fresh air for me to start a whole new regime of difficulty that I knew nothing about before. Suddenly I have to read about publishing and distribution and wholesalers and retailers and how much they're going to make, 20% here, 30% there. How much money am I going to get in the end? Not very much. I mean, it's a kind of a silly story. Publishing is kind of a joke in a way. I mean, nobody makes hardly any money unless you have a big bestseller. So I decided, as a result of doing these 3 books that I've done so far, which are kind of like putting my toe in the water, you might say, getting a taste for what the publishing business is. I'm only going to do a limited editions, period. I'm going to print like whatever, 250, 500 copies. That's it. Numbered, signed, maybe. But I'm not going to go for this mass-produced, I don't know, like competing with Random House kind of thing. It's not. I can't do that. I mean, I know that there's an audience. There's an audience for the things that I do, for the kind of eccentric performers that, you know, I'm appealing to, or the people that I'm appealing to that like this kind of sideshow, circus clown sensibility. And you know, if I have 500 books and I sell them all and I make a few bucks, fine. But I'm not going to do it to make money. I'm going to do it because I want to do something to keep my mind busy.
Yeah. Tell us about the project with Rob Torres. Some people listening or watching may not have known about Rob Torres.
Yeah, so Rob was an brilliant clown. He was such a wonderful human being, and he was performing. And I saw him at the Big Apple Circus the first time we met. We became very good friends very quickly. Had a lot of similarities and same interests, and I photographed him at the Big Apple Circus. And then he invited me to come to Paris to photograph him at Cirque de Verre, and then he invited me to St. Louis to photograph him at Circus Flora. So I did these 3 places, and then he said, we both were talking. I'm like, why don't we do a book together, like A Clown in Our Town? I mean, you have like 4 other tours coming up. Why don't we do I'll go to each place and we'll do these photographs of you in these different places, and we do all these wonderful photographs of you in these, like architecturally designated ideas and stuff like that. And he goes, yeah, let's do that. So we worked on that. We shot those 3 places, and then he disappeared. He passed away, and then I decided that I wasn't going to let this sit still. I can't imagine having these wonderful photographs and not sharing them with the people that loved them, And so I reached out. This was my first project. It wasn't actually under the umbrella of Board Visuals Press. I hadn't even started the company yet, but I wanted to do this book for Rob. So I contacted everybody I knew that had photographed him, including Michelle Bates and these other people that worked at, the Moisture Festival and different festivals around the country, and a lot of people that had posted photographs of him on Facebook and had made comments that, when he passed and this and that. And I gathered all that stuff together, which took me about a year. And I made this wonderful book, which is basically the first half is the book that he and I were working on, which is at St. Louis, Cirque de Verre, Big Apple Circus. And then it goes into all the other things, all the other wonderful pictures of different people, friends of his, and it's just a kind of a tribute. It's a tribute book to Rob, and everybody. I mean, I have people order this book from all over the world.
That's
people
amazing.
from everywhere, because he had performed all over the world, and people knew him everywhere.
He was actually one of my students the first year that I taught for Ringling Clown College. He was one of my students, and because Steve Smith and I had both studied with Sigfrido Aguilar, Rob just said, "Okay, I'm going there too."
Oh gosh, that's great!
Ended up having a beautiful life in Mexico.
I didn't know you stayed with Sigfrido. Oh, what a connection! What a great guy he is.
Oh yeah.
He's
what you've been close to, we'll say, genius, right? You've been close to some very special, powerful personalities as performers. Like, what have you gained any knowledge about their secret, or where they spring from, or
it's just
what insights can you give us to someone like Philippe Petit or Rob Torres, just in general, not about those specific people, but is there anything that you found that is consistent with somebody that's so accomplished and so special and charismatic in what they do?
Yeah, just follow your heart and work hard and don't give up, and just follow the muse. I mean, just work hard and do things that satisfy your inside gut, the things that make you feel good about doing what it is you're doing. I mean, that's, I think, what Rob and all those people did, was they performed. I mean, there is a certain understanding of like professionalism that I think a lot of young aspiring performers don't have yet, and I think that's very important. And obviously, you two have taught in schools, and you've seen that as well. But the understanding that whole thing of like practicing every day, working at something, finding original ideas to work on, all those kinds of things that are very important for people to, when they do finally get around to becoming individuals and understanding what it is that they want to perform and who they want to be when they perform. That's what it's all about, I think.
What do you think maybe today's times are almost too public? What I mean by that is, 50 years ago, if you were following your heart, you had to spend a lot of time alone. You had to be, this kind of meditator in some corner of a studio or something, and you had to do it every day. And the internet wasn't there, and all that kind of cell phones weren't around. So in some ways, it was a more private existence, and you had to put more effort into being public. and or you only became public when it was time to be public, when you felt you were prepared.
But I think
and part of the
people,
reason was you didn't know what else was out there. You had to be, I got to be good because, but now there's so much awareness of of what's going on, and people share so much. I'm not sure it's conducive to becoming this monk in the corner of the forest or the cave. You know what I mean? There's a challenge there.
James, I think that everybody's being the monk, but they're like, taking a little selfie of themselves while they're doing it.
In some ways, maybe a job like Jim's will be, I don't want to say obsolete, but because they're doing this, they don't need the guy who's like creating the image from this artistic place in a way. You know what I mean? I've seen so many kind of bad videos on YouTube that are just kills it, you know? And where before it was all about print matter. Like you had to have a really good brochure. You had to have really good photography to make a stand, And so there's a lot of challenges in this modern world, which I think are difficult for young artists to navigate.
I think so. And if you think about the fact that in 1 second presently, there are more photographs taken in that 1 second than the entire 20th century in 1 second. So that brings the bar down significantly in the photographic world, because everybody's a photographer. You can buy a really good camera for not too much money and shoot 1,000 pictures and get 2 that are really brilliant, and then think you're a photographer, even though you don't know the difference between an aperture and a shutter speed. I mean, that kind of thing is what really, is kind of leading me into becoming a publisher and less a photographer, because the idea of an important photograph is losing its importance, and it's just losing the significance it used to have. And
people can tell the difference, though. I mean, they can look at your photographs of a show, and like we said earlier, you can sort of like feel like what that show was like because you captured these moments. You saw which moments to capture.
Yeah, but like if you buy a good Sony or Canon or Nikon camera for like $3,000, and you get the basic understanding of how to use it, and you shoot 2,000 frames of a show, you can find 2 that are actually brilliant, even though you don't know what the hell you're doing. I mean, the camera does everything. The camera thinks it focuses, it does the aperture, shutter speed, it does everything. You don't have to do anything. It's like a self-driving car in a way.
Yeah.
Point it and bingo, you got yourself a portfolio. I mean, that's what's happening. So in a way, it's like it's demoralizing for people that have spent so much time polishing their craft, making good photographs,
Is there a danger there? Is there a danger?
Oh, it's a big danger. The bar is coming down. The bar is coming down.
The bar is coming down.
Yeah.
I think, Which affect, it's all one thing, a domino effect too. One thing affects another, like one aspect of an art form affects another,
art's become a different animal. I mean, it's like,
What would be your advice for a young person today, either as a performer or as a technician or an artist, a tech, I'll call you a technological artist, how does a young person navigate? What would be your words of wisdom for all?
If they're young, and then they're probably on top of the technology more than I am. So they would have more wisdom in terms of what they need to do, what they need to know, what they need to handle, what they need to embrace, what they need to get complete control over in terms of the technology. I mean, people that are doing cryptocurrency and, it's, NFTs and all these things that are happening in these days. It's just a whole new world. It's like artwork is being sold as a digital file for thousands and thousands of files. It's not even a physical thing in your hand. It's on the computer. It's some kind of digital file that's worth like 80 grand. It's like, well, what is that all about? I mean, where do we stop with all this nonsense?
What about the inside then? What about the more metaphysical aspect of an artist?
Well, that's very important, and people really need to look inside themselves and figure out what it is that they want to do with themselves, regardless of what profession they take. I mean, it's not an easy route. Well, you both know that route, that story. I mean,
well, we all do in a sense, don't we?
Yeah, exactly. It's not a difficult time. I mean, in America, because of the fact that America doesn't really pay attention to the arts as much as some of the other countries that have been in the arts and know about the arts for a much longer time than we do because we're a young country, only 200 years plus, you know. But
Yeah.
in Europe, you go to museums and you go to opera houses, and then they would never tear down an opera house or a museum in a foreign country like Germany or France or Italy. They would never tear down a building like that, but like they've done in the United States because they want to put up a high riser because it's more important for them to have that heritage and that and the importance of the art world. And like Rob Torres once said to me when he arrived at the airport, and it was like an airport, it was like, I don't know, I think it was like Hungary or Turkey or wherever. He was greeted at the door. The guy stamped his passport and said, "What do you do?" He said, "I'm a clown." And he was like, "Oh my goodness, you're absolutely a brilliant artist. We love clowns here." And he was like flabbergasted because he had never been treated like that before in this country, you know. So he was really like in tears, like, "Oh my God, thank you very much. You made my day," you know.
Did you ever contemplate moving at some point in your life to another?
I did. Yeah, I did. I've traveled everywhere, and I love New York.
Yeah. Well, talk to us about that, you know, because that's the saving grace.
New York is
like where did you contemplate maybe moving to because of all the things you just said, and what kept you in New York?
Well, you know, like I love Holland. I love Amsterdam. You know, Paris was a second choice, maybe. I love Thailand. The people are so amazing there. Yeah, it's just, but every time I go there and I try and find a place to hang my hat and like figure out, oh, it'd be great to be here and take pictures of artists here and do my thing over here. But then I come back to New York and, oh, New York has the best and the worst of everything here. That's what's so great about it. It's such a dichotomy. You got the far left and the far right and the best and the worst of everything. It's just such a great melting pot. It's just so crazy, and that's what's so wonderful about it. I mean, everybody comes to New York who wants to be seen, wants to do their thing. It's like it's the place to be, and you know, it's a hot spot. It's just like on fire all the time for years. It's been like this, you know, and I can't get away. It's like a damn addiction, you know.
Talk to us about the blog for a minute. Like, I know you interview people too, and like, when did that inspiration start? Tell us what it is and how you manage that and what the future is for that.
Yeah, so I started Void Visuals about 12 or 13 years ago. I started shooting shooting shows and then posting it to my blog because I wanted a place to put it that I didn't have to like publish a book or do a magazine or give it to someone else to get their consent that the pictures are great enough to produce someplace. So I just said, you know what, I'm going to create my own venue. So I created my own Void Visuals website, and I started posting pictures of all the shows that I started doing, all the shows that I started shooting. And then after maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, I said, you know, I think it'd be interesting to interview these people that I'm shooting. Before I shoot them, let me just like do an interview with them, talk to them about their show. What's the show about? Where did the idea come from? Kind of like what you're asking questions of me of, you know, like that kind of thing. So I just started doing video interviews with people. And I've been through like 3 or 4 camera incarnations, which is kind of fun to discover new cameras that work better for me to do the interview. And the wireless mic now, I have a great wireless mic now, which I really love. That's keeping my brain sharp. And like, you know, I'm trying to stay on top of the technology. So the interviews have been great. And I've been having such a fun time with them. I mean, I don't know how many now I have. I stopped counting, like, I don't know, 60 or 70 interviews now on the blog. You know, it's like
it's a great archive, that both the stills and the video interview.
Thank you very much.
Like you can go back there and sort of find out about, you know, it's a little piece of history that's really important for our community, for movers and physical theater artists.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. That's what I want to hear.
You feel you feel the publishing projects?
Yeah, right.
Do you feel the publishing projects are going to be stronger in your future, or are there these two worlds you deal in are going to be equal going forward?
Yeah, I think I'll continue shooting for myself. I'm not really going to shoot that many performances anymore. I'm shooting more like just out street shots, and I have a really fun Instagram account, which I really love. And the publishing thing is going to be like more fun. I mean, I'm working on a couple. I have about 3 books in the pipeline now that I'm working on. And,
that's great. That's
so I'm excited about it. You know, it's going to be, and they're going to be like special little limited editions, artistic, you know, really well done, well produced books. You know that.
Yeah, nice.
You know, yeah.
But
this one here, I mean, I'm really proud of this one. By the way, this is the one that I just did.
Right.
Right.
It's basically it's huge. It's an encyclopedia. It's like
It's big. It's
284 pages. Look at, I mean, it's like crazy.
wow. Yeah.
Wow.
It's like nuts. It's really crazy.
And that's 10 years of time, right?
Yeah, 2010 to 2020. It's all these eccentrics performing all over the damn planet. It's really been fun. And I worked on it. I had trouble with the, COVID. We were supposed to come out with it in 2020. But I'm glad we didn't, because it took me another year to get all the model releases signed from all the people in the book.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Over 200 people had to email them and send them by mail, and
Do you think that there's a silver lining in the pandemic experience of the last 2 or 3 years, or not?
I think there's a silver lining in everything. I'm an optimist. I'm an eternal optimist. I think no matter what happens, you gotta work yourself around it, work in it, work through it. It's just, you gotta find a way to just make it work for yourself. It's just that kind of a thing for me. I mean, otherwise, just give up and take a walk. I mean, it's like, why are we here for? Why am I here? What am I doing? It's like, if I don't do something that I enjoy and I love, why bother?
Yeah, good philosophy. That's excellent. I remember seeing a quote, and I think it was from Ansel Adams, and he said something like the best photo that I ever took was when I didn't have a camera, and it was like something that he saw that made a perfect photograph, but he didn't have a camera, so he has it photographed in his head. Mm-hmm. Do you have any photographs that you keep
Many. I have a feeling, I have a philosophy about photographs that not everything should be photographed. I mean, I feel like not everything should be photographed. Some things should be left unphotographed and left to the mind. Like, I'll give you an example of why I think that way. Like, for instance, when Philippe did a walk on the World Trade Center, his friend, Jean-Louis, who was there on the top of the tower, had a 16 millimeter Bolex movie camera. And he was supposed to shoot film of Philippe walking on the wire, but he was a trained still photographer. So by the time he got around to getting the 16 millimeter camera out, the walk was over. He had shot a lot of beautiful stills, but now in retrospect, when you look at the story, when he did the walk, and 2 or 3 days later, when the news got a hold of the story, right, they basically showed still photographs of him on the wire. They didn't show any video. If they would have shown video, it would have been shown 1,000,000 times. And it would have been totally knocked the whole story into like kazoo land, and nobody would have gave a shit anymore about the guy who walked on the wire of the World Trade Center, because they just saw, a minute of it 100,000 times. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I think when the fact that it was a still photograph, people looked at it and go, wow, that's crazy. And then when James Marsh came out with the movie, Man on Wire, it took off like a bat out of hell, because there was no video or still photographs of the walk. And that's an example of why I think some things are left on videotape, unshot,
Yeah. Yes, very good.
Better memories, are left in the head.
How do you feel about legacy, just personal legacy or legacy in general? Is that something that is important to you, or is there a perspective that you can put on that? In some ways, taking a photo is dealing in that area already. Like, there's a documentation, there's value put on it, and there's history, and there's so many things that are connected to a fantastic, great photograph throughout all facets of human existence, right?
That's it.
So what are your feelings on that in general?
That's the legacy right there. I don't need to say any more. You just said it all. I mean, there's nothing for me to think about. I don't want to think about. I mean, like, I was very charmed by Robert Shields' answer to that question. I'm still living. I have no legacy for me. I'm still doing my thing. Yeah.
You don't have time for legacy.
Yeah. No, I'm not thinking about that. I mean, I do give thoughts to the end of the road, you might say. You know what I mean? But it's not.
What are those thoughts?
Not very many. I know I'm getting older. I feel it. But tough shit.
Yeah, I like to think that those of us that are in the 70s are in the departure zone, the departure lounge. The flight hasn't been called yet. We're still eating at the buffet, and hopefully the flight will be delayed for a while.
That's right. Exactly.
But do you ever look at your older photos and reflect on them in a particular way, or like maybe I should have done this or that, or do you just forget, like,
No,
just
I
go
look
on
at,
to the next moment?
I
Like
look
an
at them all the
athlete.
time. I go through them all the time. I'm going through pictures all the time for like researching for books. Like I just got an email from Slava, his secretary, just sent me a picture. Just sent me a request for a picture of George Carl that I took in my studio. That he wants to put it in his book. And I also shot. I have a picture of Slava in the Insights book. That I can't seem to find. But
It's
anyway,
right there in front of you, right?
yeah, it's right here. Yeah, the picture of Slava that's in here. Because they want that picture in their book too. So I have to dig it up. I have to dig up the original negative of those two pictures and send it to them.
Are you good with organizing, or I mean, do you have, like
Uh,
somebody like Javi Burgess has these files and files and stacks, and I've been, I was in his apartment like 40 years ago, but I can imagine what it's like now. But even then, it was like stacks and stacks of archives. Are you good with the organization, or?
I had a run where I had two different women come in over a period of a year and organize all my analog negatives. My slides, my negatives, my contact sheets, all those things are on the wall over here based on years.
Yeah.
The digital thing is a whole different ball game. I've been doing my best to do, I can't believe I've been shooting digital so long. I mean, it's so weird that it's been going on for such a long time. I can't believe that, digital has been happening that long. It's so weird. I feel like it was just like a couple of years ago that I started shooting digital. But I started late to the game because I didn't like Photoshop, so I waited until Lightroom came out. And Lightroom is a much better organizational tool for digital files. And
Do you ever think about the dark room back in the day?
I
Like, how
love
do
the
you put that
darkroom.
in perspective?
I love the darkroom. I had so much fun in the darkroom. I was really good in the darkroom. I worked for Newsweek
How do
magazine.
you describe being good in the dark room? What does it take to be good in the dark room? Is that like a juggler? Are you like some kind of prop handler? What's that? A magician? Is it like being a magician? What is
Being
it?
in a dark room is like being a monk. It's like meditation. You're in a dark room with an orange light, and you're looking into a tray, and all of a sudden these pictures start coming up on a
Whoa.
blank piece of paper. It's magic.
Yeah.
It's like
It
magic.
is. It is
It
magical.
is magical, yeah. And and if you get, I mean, I became a really good printer because I worked at Newsweek for about a year, and then I had like a little tiny dark room at home in my outside bathroom. It was a tiny little room. I would have to turn like this to do one tray, and then turn like this to do another tray. It was so tiny, but I was able to print some amazing things because I was so good at what I did because I had that your experience at Newsweek, but. Yeah, Darkroom was a great place. I love. I was just thinking yesterday about shooting film again. I have a wonderful camera called the Olympus Pen F, which is half frame. I don't know if you ever heard of half frame cameras. It
I think
shoots
I have, yeah.
it shoots two pictures per 35 millimeter frame. So you
Okay.
get 72 pictures per roll. And I used to print them together. I print one 35 millimeter frame with two different images on it, like contradicting each other. So I would shoot them with that intention, to have one of this and then one of that. So when I printed it together, it was like this kind of crazy juxtaposition.
So
So,
you would say there's an amazing attention to detail in the dark room, and
oh,
just in general, right? I mean, that's the mime's brain, is the attention to detail.
absolutely.
It's the sculptor, whatever, the designer of space. There's got to be that attention to detail.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, mine is very detail oriented. I mean, and
That's what makes the texture, brings the texture, right?
that's
And
right.
it's also the aspect in mime of making something out of nothing, which is kind of the magic
Yeah,
of a
exactly.
dark room too, because you start with nothing. And my dad was a photographer, and he had a dark room, and we would help him print the pictures. So that experience of looking at a blank piece of paper that slowly becomes a picture, it's so amazingly magical. And you don't really have that with the instantaneousness of digital photography.
No, it's a whole different experience. I mean, not necessarily a bad experience or a better experience. It's just a different experience. I mean, you can't look at it like it's better or worse. It's a different way of dealing with the same thing. It's like you're getting
Mhm.
instant gratification. I mean, that's in a way, it's a brilliant thing to be able to shoot, 500 frames and be able to look at them a second later.
Yeah.
So
So to me,
That's magical too.
it is magical. Yes, and magical. Digital magic is something else.
so
Yes,
the,
right.
the image maker, the image taker, the image capturer, which is the photographer or the filmmaker, there's legacy involved there. What I mean by that is, if you're a live performer, like I used to watch Robert Shields perform live in Union Square, do a street thing in the mid 70s. Like there's, I know he's doing a documentary now, but what I'm saying is there's some footage of that, but there's all these things that have happened throughout the history of performance that no one will ever really see. So it seems to me the people who take the photos or did the films starting, in the early, parts of the last centuries, that's crucial to the how an art form lives on, don't you think? Absolutely. Besides handing down the word of mouth or the monk passing on the secrets to the next monks in the dojo somewhere, right? But it seems like your profession, which started as a performer, is incredibly important to just the survival of an art form in general.
I agree. I mean, that's why I call it perpetuating the mythology of eccentric performing arts, because it is. I mean, I have a very interesting example here. So this is a book called Step Right This Way, and it's a book of photographs by a photographer named Edward Kelty, who's a very unknown photographer now. Nobody even knows who this guy is. But he was an industrial photographer. He would shoot, like jobs during the day. He would shoot products and factories and whatever like that. But his passion was circus. He loved the circus. So he would go to these Ringling Brothers and Colby, Clyde Brothers.
What time frame is this when he was doing
That's a good question. That's a good question. Let me see. I think it was 30s. Yeah. So anyway, so they put together this book of his photographs, but I got to show you them. I mean, he used a large format camera. Now, 35 millimeter is about this big of a frame, right? And 4x5 is about this big a piece of film, and 8x10 is this piece of a film. His was 11x17 film. He used a camera that used a film this big, and he photographed. I got to show you this. This is mind-boggling. What he photographed. Let's see if I got a group shot like this. Look at that.
Yeah.
I mean, he photographed the whole damn circus and all the people in the circus.
And all the detail of it.
All the detail, yeah, all the everything. I mean, you can see on the cover that there's a picture of the Ringling Brothers group on the cover, like that.
Wow. Yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's amazing. So anyway, this is an example of perpetuating the mythology of the circus by his photographs, and I mean, granted, not a lot of people know Kelty, but he's a very well-known photographer in the circus people's historian kind of world, you know what I mean? And I find these guys fascinating what they did. I own 2 original Kelty prints. I bought them at an auction, which is really some big.
Well, it seems like someday people will treasure. I mean, they probably already are, but
yeah,
I mean, but anybody of your accomplishment, your photos will be treasured for eternity. It seems, until we destroy the world, right?
What's the name of the photographer whose last name was Kelty? What's the first name?
Oh, it's Edward Kelty.
Edward.
Yeah,
I've heard of that name somewhere.
Initial. Edward J. Kelty.
Oh, cool.
What was his life? He's probably just passed on by now, right?
Oh yeah, a long time ago. He had a very difficult life. Ended up leaving his family and wife and kids behind, and but the pictures are like absolutely brilliant. I mean, just like.
Here's a question I didn't ask you, but I'm interested in. Maybe since this is still recording, maybe they'll be edited in. So you have made your mark in a obscure, I don't want to say obscure, but a very unique corner of the performance world or the art world. What kept you in that world rather than going commercial or, like into the more slick, large, strokes of what a photographer could be, like what's that? How did that happen?
Well, I think it was basically a kind of a natural progression from performing to photographing people, photographing me, and me photographing myself before I went out and performed. And so I was also photographing friends of mine who were performing in the street. My friend Jeff Sheridan, who's an amazing magician, I'm actually doing a book about Jeff's work. And I've been photographing Jeff for 30 years in the street. He's been performing in the street as a street. He wrote a book called Street Magic along with another guy named Edward Claflin. It's a very, very famous book about the history of street magic around the world. And so I've been photographing Jeff for 30 years, and I have photographs of him and multiple other people in the street that I've photographed over the years. So, yeah, I never really was fascinated by commercial photography. I never liked the idea of selling. I still don't like selling. That's why I like the idea of doing a limited edition book and not going for the mass market, trying to sell a book about eccentric performing arts to the masses. I mean, like, forget about it. It's like
So this is about relationships then. I mean,
also, yeah, absolutely.
It's about like strong relationships and love and so forth, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, love and respect to what you do. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I think you gotta love what you do, otherwise, like I said before, just don't bother.
Yeah.
You know.
Wow, I had a question I just wanted to ask you that went away. It was a really good question. I can't
I went
remember.
away.
Oh
It
my
was
God.
brilliant. It was
It was
so
like
brilliant. Now it's gone.
it was like a really
There you
important
go.
question. I was really curious to see what you'd say, but I can't remember now. So
Well, we'll have to have Jim come back again. We'll have just another.
yeah. Oh, I know what it is.
Oh, good.
How do you define eccentric performer?
Okay, so that's an interesting question because if you go back to the old vaudeville days and look at vaudeville posters and vaudeville playbills, you'll see that quite a few acts use the word eccentric as a description for their type of act, whether it be an eccentric dance. Betsy Betos, she's doing a book
Yes.
about, yeah, she's doing a book about eccentric dance, right? So, I mean, different people in different disciplines were doing eccentric things. So, I mean, I think it's like out of the ordinary. So when I was starting to work on this book, I'm like, okay, I photograph clowns, I photograph performance artists, I photograph cabaret performers, I photograph street performers, I photograph opera singers, and what's an inclusive term that would encapsulate all those people's descriptions? And I discovered that the eccentric was the word, that was actually a good word to describe everybody, because most everybody was a one person act, and they were doing something that wasn't like legitimate acting. It wasn't a straight play. It wasn't something that they were doing as a monologue. It wasn't a Sam Shepard thing. It was something they created themselves that they wanted to do on stage in front of an audience with the skills that they had, whatever they were. So that's eccentric. I mean, I find it, having been on stage, I find it extremely admirable for anybody that puts their goddamn foot on the stage and puts himself in front of an audience and performs. I find that like phenomenal. I mean, they deserve a medal for that, period.
So by nature, performance is eccentric in many ways.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, especially solo performers or vaudeville type acts, they used to call it was it like New Vaudeville? I mean, that book was called New Vaudeville, right?
Right.
Yeah, so that was the term in the 70s when Bill Irwin came out and they were doing the Full Moon Show. It was called New Vaudeville. So, yeah, I call it eccentric. I think eccentric really works for the book that I did, and I just grabbed "Don't Miss This" off of a vaudeville poster. I just love the idea. Don't miss this. Don't miss this. And right.
So Jim, we'll put a link to your website, but just say it nicely and clearly. Like, where would we find your new book and all of your archive of interviews and photographs?
Yeah. So the new book can be had at V like Victor, or Vaudevisuals, vvpress.com. That's where you can get the book. And then the website is Vaudevisuals, like vaudeville, but vaudevisuals.com.
Wow.
That's great. I mean, I treasure that website because I just like to go in there and just kind of
Thank you.
go down the rabbit hole, really.
So now, here's a question that I'd like you to answer. What do you want to be when you grow up?
Oh my goodness. A good person.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Good answer.
I think
Wow, I could wax philosophical on that one. Meaning
We'll just
that
leave
if
it at that. That
taking
was
that
good.
thought and putting that into photography is is probably the secret to finding the heart of the subject, maybe,
Yeah.
somewhere the humanity comes out in all its glory. So that's wonderful.
Yeah, I feel like okay, so my thought process about age and life and all that stuff is this: is that when you do this, it's the last time you're going to have that breath. So take advantage of it and do the best you can with it, because it's never going to happen again.
Fantastic.
That's beautiful, Jim.
Thank you.
Yeah, wow.
Thank you so much for being a part of this podcast. It's been a wonderful conversation.
My pleasure.
And I can't wait for everyone to go out and look at everything that you've been doing. It's been wonderful.
Very much. Keep up the good work, you guys. Beautiful.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. This has been amazing. So I can't wait to have people hear this. So thank you. That's it, ladies and gentlemen.
All right, have a good one.
Others, whoever, cats, dogs, whatever out there. This has been the Mime Radio Show podcast. Thank you very much.